I'm going to present you work that was done not in the field, but actually behind computer screens, doing analysis of data, literature data, and doing analysis of outcomes of models. Junji already told you that there are different forms of intercropping. You have fully mixed. Usually fully mixed is done by mixing the seeds and sowing in the same row. You can also have row intercropping, and you can have strip intercropping. In China, historically, most of the intercropping is strip intercropping. They do it in strips, so they can manage the species separately, and having them in strips rather than single rows, I suppose it eases the management just a little. I think in Africa, it's mostly row intercropping, right? Yeah. In Europe, people don't do this kind of intercropping because there is no mechanization to do it. So we have no history in strip intercropping, but when we try it, it actually works, just like it works in China. But in practice, we cannot immediately use it. It needs technology development. This slide is making another distinction. It's about the time in intercropping. Simultaneous is when you grow the two species at the same time. Relay is when they have different growing periods. This is a very important distinction. This is called relay intercropping. So you sow one species first, then there is a period of growing along without any competition. Then the second species comes. Second species is not so happy in the beginning because the first species is already tall. Then the first species is harvested, and the second species is enjoying life because there's more radiation, there's more water and nutrients available. Relay intercropping can make use of a growing season that is long enough to do relay intercropping, but not long enough to grow one species after the other. It's a good system for a production situation with a high yield target. Simultaneous intercropping, on the other hand, is more suited towards dealing with limitations. If one species, well, if for instance in Southern Europe, you're growing cereal with very low nitrogen input, for instance in organic agriculture, it may be very beneficial to mix in a legume, because legumes can fix their own nitrogen from the atmosphere. They're not very competitive for nitrogen. And the cereal will perform better and have a better grain quality because of that. That has been demonstrated. So this type of intercropping system is more common in Europe. The product is harvested as a bulk, so with normal machinery. And if you want to use it separately, for instance, you can mix wheat and lentils. You can try to separate it after harvest. It's not necessarily easy, but usually it's possible. Also needs technology development, and it also needs a supply chain for that product.
So it's not that you have strips, and it's not that the first crop is harvested separately with a different machine than the other.
If you have the strip intercropping, then this is a traditional system done with hand labor. Now, I have a photo, not in this presentation, showing a machine that is actually harvesting 2 rows in a intercrop. So some machinery has been developed, but it's cumbersome to actually have machinery that is harvesting 2 rows because you're still spending a lot of time to harvest the whole field. If you can harvest 6 rows or 12 rows at the same time, this is much more efficient with your time. So we're facing I think enormous challenges with the practical implementation, but the practical implementation is incredibly important, but it's not where I focus my energy, because I just want to provide convincing evidence to other people in the research field and to farmers and policymakers that actually diversity is a good thing to have in your field, that it's more productive and it can reduce pests and diseases, it can improve carbon cycling, nitrogen cycling in your soil, it can do a lot of good things. But it's not immediately implementable, except for this simultaneous. That's really not a big problem, although sometimes there's a supply chain problem, because I know that in Switzerland, they can have wheat pea and just harvest it as bulk, and have a lot of pea in the wheat and still use it for making bread. They make bread of that. In France, that is not done. It's impossible. There are laws against that. Wheat needs to have a certain purity because that's sacrosanct in France. So there may be impediments that have nothing to do with cultivation or harvesting, but have to do with the rules of how product is used. You have seen a similar picture, but I'm going to show you 10 or 12 pictures from China, because it's incredibly inspiring to see what farmers are actually doing. So this is along the Yellow River in Gansu. Across the river, you'll see it's a dry place. This is in June. The photo is made by Li Long. We hope to have him online tomorrow. And all of this is strip into crops. And most of it is stripped relay into crops. So because the growing season in Gansu is not so long, it is maybe from April till early October, is not enough for double cropping in the North China Plain, which is farther east. It's hot enough, you can have first wheat, then maize. So they do double cropping. Here they cannot do double cropping because the winter is too long, but they can do relay intercropping. Chunji also showed this picture, again by Li Long, flax, soybean, some fruit trees. So they're also changing their land use system, but because there's increasing demand for fruit. It's never the same thing in agriculture. 10 years later, always different. Wheat, soybean, you can see that these species are in a different growth phase. The wheat is almost mature, still has 2-3 weeks to go. But the soybean still has several months to go. So it's a relay system. And after the harvest of the wheat, the soybean will use more of the space. It will not cover the field totally, maybe for 70%. And yields are usually, well, biomass and yield, more or less proportional to the radiation intercepted on green leaves. That's a good rule of thumb. It's not perfect, but probably explains 70% of your yield. The wheat is also very happy before the soybean is there because there's no competition there. So all the light comes to the side of the plants. I will show you later a picture what the border rows wheat look like in this kind of system. These plants have lots of tillers. So the wheat is over yielding, the soybean is over yielding. So this crop is maybe giving you 70% of the wheat yield of a soap crop, 70% of the soybean yield of a soap crop. And totally it gives you 140% yield. That's great. That's why farmers do that. That's why farmers do that if they have the time to do that, because this is handwork. Now, farmers have no lack of imagination. I found this really fantastic. I was blown away when I saw that Jochem has seen this. In the same village, you see the wheat, and the wheat is will be mature. And there's soybean grown here. Here you see the soybean better, but they also put an occasional maize plant there. And that maize plant will compete, of course, with the soybean for the light, but there are not so many. So maybe the limitation in the light for the soybean is not so bad for the soybean, but you have the maize on top. So the farmers are exploiting the land to the fullest. So it's not a low input system. It's not an extensive system. It's an intensive system. Flax and soybean and maize, same principles apply here. The flax is already pretty far. It's flowering. It will produce seed, and fiber can be used, but I think they mostly use the seed for oil. Soybean is very young. It will use the land later. It will tiller and branch out, and then the maize goes up, and it will provide shade, but not too much. And there's just an incredible diversity of systems in China. I'm not saying that the whole of China is covered with intercrops. It's totally not the case. There's maybe 2% of the land area used for intercropping, 3% of the land used for agroforestry, 95% is monocrops. If you travel in the North China Plain or the northeast of China, all you see in late summer is maize, 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 maize. Nothing else but maize, because they need to feed their pigs and cows. But in the little pockets of diversity that exist, farmers do unimaginable what they do. So wheat, soybean, you have already seen that, but this is a bigger field. Potato, maize, a very interesting system. This has a disease control property. So the maize is acting as a dilution for the potato. So that's spores of Phytophthora, because there is always a Phytophthora problem in Yunnan where this is done. So 50% of the spores produced will land on maize, so they will not do anything. Maize is not producing any spores of Phytophthora. Maize is a little taller. Plants are a barrier for spore dispersal. At the same time, they may increase the humidity. So there are multiple effects happening in these trip crops, but by and large, it reduces plant disease, and there are some examples of combinations that are actually highly disease suppressive because of this kind of rather simple mechanism of dilution and barrier. This is a system I saw for the first time this year. Song Tao had the same picture on his poster. It's showing wheat that has been harvested. The sunflower is in full bloom. The sunflower still has some time to go. The wheat was earlier in the season. It's a temporal complementarity. So together, these species capture more light than each of them would capture alone when they were alone in the field. So it's a very strong mechanism for over-yielding. And this is not taken at the best time, but it shows you also sunflower. And underneath the sunflower are some watermelons that farmers chose not to harvest because they're not good enough, not big enough. But the system here is that they first sow the watermelon, and then when the watermelon is flowering, they start to sow the sunflower in there, and then the sunflower will come up but not provide too much shade. Maybe it's slowed down a little bit by the competition for light by the watermelon, but the watermelon is doing fine. They harvest the watermelon, and then the sunflower takes over. Again, it's a way to have two crops from one field in 1 year. So it's intensive agriculture. And this is just to hit home the message that there is incredible diversity of systems. I'm cheating because it's just the same picture.
Is there a difference in chemical or fertilizer input between the monocrop, specifically in China, between maize monocrops, for example?
This is a very good question. Researchers have done intercropping experiments with 4 strategies. This was found out by one of our students recently. One strategy is no input. This is something that they also tried in Southern Europe. If we supply no fertilizer, how good is the cereal legume mixture? The other one is to give equal input to all the treatments. This is what Li Long has been doing a lot. Li Long is really one of the leaders in intercropping research. And in his long-term experiments, up to 20 years by now, they give the same fertilizer input to maize, to wheat, and faba bean. That's agronomically not a very good idea because faba bean really doesn't need a lot of nitrogen. Maize doesn't need a lot of nitrogen. But experiment-wise, it is a good idea because you can claim that you did not give any system an advantage by giving more fertilizer. The third system is what we call intermediate input, where, for instance, if you would give the soybean 50 kilograms of nitrogen in maize 250, and if you do a 50-50 system, you give the soybean the equivalent of 50 kilograms per hectare, but then it would be 25 kilograms per hectare. You give the maize 1/2 of 250 kilograms per hectare, 125, but still per unit area of maize is the same. And then the sum is 150 is the average of the soil crops. And the fourth system is done only in one place in China, is to actually give the intercrop the sum of the nutrient inputs of the soil crops. Why do they do that? Because they say we want to have maximum yield here, so we're going to push maize plants on a narrower space. We are still going to have the same number of soybean plants in a maize-soybean intercrop, but we'll put them closer together in the row. And then, because we have the same number of plants, we'll give it the same fertilizer, not to give it disadvantage. This system has a high land equivalent ratio, has a low fertilizer use equivalent ratio. We'll be talking a bit more about that on Thursday. So that was a pretty long answer to your question. What do farmers do? I've asked that a little bit in China. I think they tend towards intermediates. But when we designed experiments in Wageningen 4 years ago, we forgot to think about the fertilizer input and initially, and then when the farmer asked us how much fertilizer should I put here, we also decided to use intermediates because it makes agronomic sense. Actually, because you often have some improvement in the growth species in the intercrop, you would need to give a little more. That's what I think now. Long answer. Very good question. So intercropping has a high land use efficiency. I didn't show you any data, but that is so. And it can improve the capture of resources, nitrogen, and it can suppress pest diseases and weeds. It doesn't always do so. Sometimes it gives you really problems with weeds because you cannot use herbicides anymore, often. But it also has the competence to suppress weeds. Lambert Bastiaans will be talking about that later. Improves end cycling. I have one slide somewhere that shows that. But is it more productive than the most productive sole crop in the mixture? That's the question we asked for this paper that was published last year. And if an intercrop produces more than the most productive crop that is in the mixture, this is called transgressive overyielding, so higher than both. What would you expect? Will intercropping give you more than the highest yielding species? Or somewhere in the middle between the high yielding and the low yielding? Or almost similar to the high yielding? What would you expect?
I wouldn't expect it to be so good, otherwise more people would do it.
You wouldn't expect it to be so.
I wouldn't expect transgressive overyielding.
Yes, and then your argument was?
Then more people would do it.
Then more people would do it. Okay. So you don't think the transgressive overyielding? Well, probably not. Okay. Yeah. But mind you, intercropping is complicated. It's not easy. It's not
You need
easy.
an answer, right?
Yeah. It's an answer. It's a good answer. I like the answer. Any other answers?
I think it's very difficult because it's very complex system. So one year can be very high and this other year can be very low. So if you, let's say, compare 10 years, maybe the land equivalent ratio is like 1, but some years you can have 1.5, some years you can have 0.8.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about variability because it's a very complicated topic. It would be a lecture on its own, maybe next edition of the course. People like to think that intercropping will reduce the variability, and there is evidence that it does, because if the year is too dry for one species, maybe a species that can better cope with dryness will perform, maybe because of a somewhat different growing season or rooting depths or things like that. That's complementarity. Same for wet years, cool years, hot years. There is some evidence that intercropping reduces variability, but we tried to show that with cover crops. I'm trying to find the Ricardo, and we didn't find any evidence that mixtures of cover crop species were more resilient to variability and conditions. Okay, so let me put it this way: if you do a mixture, one species has a higher yield than the other species. So if you mix wheat, maybe it can give you 8 tons of grain per hectare. With maize, maybe it can give you 12 tons of grain per hectare. You replace half your maize plants by wheat. You don't expect a yield increase, do you? So actually, we do expect yield to go down. We expect a tendency towards the mean. But people have argued if it's not better than the best, why bother? This is also an interesting question. So think about that. Why bother if it's not better than the best? Now, there are different metrics for the relative productivity of intercrops and sow crops. Looks like it's 0 from here. We have land equivalence ratio, we have net effect ratio, we have transgressive overyielding index. The land, and I'm going to explain all 3 metrics to you because the metrics they determine your answer, and I can tell you what the answer is. Land equivalent ratio is quite high for intercropping. It's 1.24 approximately. Net effect ratio is the ratio of the yield you get, the total yield, total grain yield, and the yield you expect, which is the weighted average of the sow crop yield. So in the example of wheat and maize, 50% of 8, 50% of 12, that's 10. If you get 11, your net effect ratio is 1.1. That's another answer than the land equivalent ratio. And the transgressive overyielding index would divide 11 by 12. It would be lower now. So 3 metrics, 3 different answers. And that's actually what the paper is about, because this question on transgressive overyielding was not answered. Well, it was answered in some papers. But some papers say, no transgressive overyielding. Other papers say there is transgressive overyielding. And it makes you wonder, well, is there now on average transgressive overyielding or not? So you need to synthesize the information in the literature. These are the questions that are answered by these metrics. Land equivalent ratio. Do species mixtures achieve the same production as monostands using less land? So you're actually not asking what the yield is. You're asking, how much land do I need to get this production? So you have a hectare of intercrop and you say, okay, I want to have that from sow crops. Am I going to use less land or more land? That's the land equivalent ratio. The net effect ratio, as I just explained, is looking at your total yield compared to your total expected yield. And the transgressive overyielding is comparing your total yield to the highest of your sow crop yields.
With the transgressive overyielding index, then you assume that the value of a certain of yield is the same for both crops, right?
It's not an economic index. It's just asking about a ratio of production. What you're asking is highly relevant. It adds complexity, and it adds uncertainty to the answer, because sometimes maize price may be high, sometimes wheat price may be high. It depends on yields and markets, and it's very irregular. So we did not analyze that at all. But in the end, what matters for a farmer, and we never analyzed it in a meta-analysis, is gross margin. Is how much money, what's the difference between my revenue and my costs on a per hectare basis. And the higher that is, the better I'm off. This is, of course, an overly simplified picture. It ignores all the other things in terms of whether you have birds on your farm, whether you think you're doing a good thing, whether you think your practices should be respected by citizens. It's ignoring all those things. But gross margin is very important. It's not in these indices. This is just about production. This is how the land equivalent ratio is defined. It's the relative yield of your first species plus the relative yield of the other species. Y1 is the yield of species 1, Y2 is the yield of species 2. This is in intercropping, and M1 and M2 are the monocrop yields. I skip the other lines. Here's an example. This is a relay system. This is work done by Zhang Lizhen, a former student. Here is wheat. Here is nothing. This is background between the wheat. But the wheat is quite happy because there is light coming from the sides, and this helps the plants in water rows. It also can root in soil where nobody's competing for the water and nobody's competing for the nutrients. So it's an ideal situation for the wheat here. Here the cotton is sown. This is not great for cotton because they have shading. They grow less fast. They may have competition for water as well. Here, now it's a bit difficult to see because of the sunshine, but there's a combine going over the wheat and is harvesting the wheat, but it's high enough to leave the cotton untouched, so it can be harvested. And here is the cotton filling the field and also covering most of the wheat rows, not all, but maybe 70%. Now, in this system, this is at the time 6 tons per hectare wheat yield. I'm sure it's much higher now. 1125 kilogram of lint yield, so this is the fiber of cotton. The intercrop will give you 60 to 70% of this 6,000 kilogram per hectare. Will also give you 60 to 80% of this 1125 kilogram per hectare of lint. So in total, it gives you 120 to 150% of your yield. So if you wanted to have wheat and cotton lint in the first place, intercropping is a good choice because you actually get more than you would have from sole crops. And actually, what this result tells you is that 1 hectare of the wheat cotton intercrop gives you the same production as approximately 0.7 hectare of sole wheat and 0.7 hectare of sole cotton. And this 0.7 here is actually the relative yield you get in the intercrop. You just add them up, and the meaning is the area of sole crop that you would need to get the production of 1 unit area of the intercrop. Does that make sense? That makes sense. Now this is the net effect ratio. I think I need to switch off some light.
Yeah, the curtains don't work. Very short.
Yeah.
It's not a curtain. It's just for show.
Yeah.
It's just for show.
What's the matter?
Those curtains are no curtains.
There are no curtains.
No.
Okay.
The pieces of cloth.
Okay. Okay. I think it's already better.
Yes.
Yeah, the sun is gone. You did
You
it?
see, we have sun control there.
Yeah.
This is the net effect ratio. So it's the sum of the intercrop yields, and this is your expected intercrop yield. So it's a proportion of your monocrop yield 1 plus a proportion of your monocrop yield 2, and these proportions sum to 1. So they're the species shares. I think you call them LS, right? Land share, your equation. Actually, these land shares are tricky to estimate. If anybody wants to know how we do that, then we can talk about that in face-to-face. And this is transgressive over yielding. You just take the maximum of your monocrop yields, and you divide your total intercrop yield by the largest of your monocrop yields. Illustration. So suppose you're mixing maize and soybean, and here's your intercrop yield, and your intercrop yield, the total, because that's what you're calculating, Y1 plus Y2. So you're equating maize grain and soybean grain, which is, you might not agree with that, but this is what we do. It's a simplification, but you can also do energy, you can do protein, you can do weight, you could do value if you wish. So there are many things you can do here. Total intercrop yield, maize yield, soybean yield. Total intercrop yield actually the same as the maize yield, monocrop yield. So TOI is 1 because there's no yield increase compared to the most productive sole crop. Of course, there's a tremendous yield increase compared to the least productive sole crop, but that's not what we calculated. Now, the light equivalent ratio of this system is pretty good because this 2 tons of soybean grain, that's 50% of a soybean crop. This 8 ton of maize grain is 80% of your soil maize yield. So this represents 0.5 plus 0.8 on the land equivalent ratio scale. So the land equivalent ratio is 1.3. So this system, even though it's not increasing your total yield per hectare, is producing something that's actually pretty hard to produce in the sole crop, soybean. And it does so in an efficient way. If you compare this intercrop yield to what you could have expected, then, well, what do you expect? Well, you expect half of your soil maize yield, 5 tons per hectare, half of your soybean yield, 2 tons per hectare, total 7, and you get 10. So your net factor ratio is 1.43. So in the paper, we explain these things, and we do a meta-analysis on the TOI, the LER, and the NER that was achieved in 226 intercropping trials. And that was work by Chunji and by a previous student, Yu Yang, to extract all those data from the literature. And it was work by Chunji to analyze it. So average LER was 1.23 with the confidence interval from 1.2 to 1.27. TOI, actually not bad. This was a comment of the reviewers. They said, wow, that is darned great. I forgot the exact wording. Do you remember?
Intercropping performed as the best. Performed as best as the.
They were almost using swear terms. So like, well, it's darn much better than you would ever expect, right? You mix in something that's worse, and that still is doing pretty well. 0.96. If you calculate the transgressive over-yielding index for protein, actually you're going on the upside of 1. It's not significant. Well, I suppose if you actually do, if you collect more data, I think you might get there. And net effect ratio is more or less like the land equivalent ratio. It's also pretty large. So average LER was 1.23, and then, well, if you would need 1.3 hectare to get a yield of 1 hectare of monocrop, it means that you have saved 90% of your land. This is actually quite important. If you can do that would save a lot of space for agriculture and that you use for agriculture. So you could have more nature or more housing blocks for people to actually live, because there's an enormous shortage of housing. So that's a very good thing. Also, managing land for agriculture has all kinds of side effects. We put fertilizer, we till the soil. Actually, if we would use less land and make it more productive, that would be a big advantage. If we can do it in a way that's sustainable, of course. Average NER was 1.28, so higher productivity than you would expect. So intercrops do substantially more than the simple arithmetic average, on average. And the average TOI was 0.96. Not so bad. For grain or energy production per unit of N fertilizer, I did not specify here how we calculate that exactly, but you can go to the paper. It's the same formulas, but instead of calculating everything per unit land, you calculate it per unit fertilizer that you put in, per kilogram fertilizer. Then actually we get more grain or energy per unit N fertilizer. And that was significant. So higher end-use efficiency. Not surprising, because a lot of these intercrops have cereal legume complementarity. And in this system, the cereals do well. The legumes do just okay or so-so. And as a whole, these systems are good. And the TOI for protein production per unit N was 1.06. Still a bit on the upside of 1. But protein production per unit N fertilizer was similar to that of sole crops. These are the figures that belong to that. So the LER way over 1, the NER way over 1. But if you compare to the most productive sole crop, not necessarily better, but approximately equally good. But then you are saving a lot of land if you do that. So it's still a very good system, and that was a major take-home message for ourselves when we developed this paper. That we started with this paper thinking that TOI was important, but at the end of the day, we think, yeah, it's interesting to calculate TOI, but what we really care about is the land equivalent ratio. It's a more important metric. The TOI only relevant if you just want to produce bulk, if you just want to produce calories to grow more pigs. But actually, this is rarely the case, because we don't want to have only one product on the land. We don't want to have only one crop in the land. We want to have a diversity of crops. We want to have diversity. We want to have wildlife. We want to have a diverse food basket. So the TOI is actually, maybe it's all the wrong metric, but people want to know it anyhow. I'm zooming out big time and then skipping over a lot of stuff. Intercropping is a superior land use to produce a diversity of products on the farm because it can concentrate production on less land. So at a farm level, intercropping can really give you these major production increases in the order of 20%. At a crop level, it doesn't, because and that is mostly because you get away from some crops that are low yielding. By growing them in intercrops, you can have high yielding crops on all your parcels, and you divide the resources between the crops, between those that need a lot and those that need less. Intercrops are not clearly superior in productivity to the most productive sole crop, and this I already said, that growing maize may be superior. Actually, that's exactly what farmers do worldwide. But growing species mixtures is superior if we want to grow diversity for our food basket and for having healthy crop production systems. And we did it by meta-analysis, and there were a lot of papers. And then I have 10 or 15 minutes on modeling. Can you still listen? Okay, good. At some point, the parasympathetic kicks in. Meta-analysis is based on system-level data on yields and actually input. So it's the big stuff of input-output, and it's a synthesis of what we already know. But actually, what I've discovered by doing meta-analysis is you can ask big questions. You can ask different questions. So it's very interesting. It's statistics, and you have response variables for system response and explanatory variables, which are proxies for processes. But there's not really processes in there. We just have some indices that are proxies for processes. Modeling is based on principles of plant growth, and Jochem will be talking more about that than Sabine Seidel and Maduri, maybe, I'm not sure. We will not be talking about modeling, but there will be modeling later. There's a process level and a system level. So processes like plant growth, stem extension, leaf extension, tiller formation, photosynthesis, and then modeling these data at process level for model parameterization and a system level for model testing. And usually this is done with dynamic equations, so completely different. Modeling, I'm talking a bit about it because in the Netherlands we are getting interested in strip cropping. This is a farm in the polder area near Lelystad. The farm is called Werf. It's kind of public farm, which is growing organically crops for land that will be later used for housing. So they don't want to contaminate it with pesticides. And they use strip cropping. So Dirk van Apeldoorn is heavily involved in this. And this is what it looks like. I think this is in Lelystad. It looks beautiful. Faba bean, barley, I suppose, wheat. This is weeds, I think. Weeds can be difficult to control. And Yeah, why do we have this? Well, management with tractors requires strips of at least 3 meters wide. If we want farmers to grow diversity, we need to make them proposals that they can actually do it. But yield advantages may be lost in such wider strips. I'm not so convinced there will be substantial yield advantages there because the yield advantages are mostly in the border rolls. So how much yield advantage can we actually expect? That was done by Pepijn van Oort in a modeling paper. Very, very nice paper, together with Gao Fang, a PhD student that we had a couple of years ago. And everything we do here is actually based upon the idea that we can calculate the crop production on the basis of the interception of light. Now, interception of light is complicated because light comes from all directions. Over the course of the year, the sun changes position. Over the course of the day, the sun changes position. The light is extinguished in the canopy. There's no limit to the detail that you can include there. You can make it very complicated. So this was work done by one of our students. He did his thesis this year, Wang Zishan. He used a geometric model for the extinction of light in rays that come from all kinds of different angles, a big angle jumble of cosines and sines and tangents. And the light comes from all directions. And this is just a horizontal projection of where on this half dome the light is coming from. So most of the light comes from low angles because there's a lot of dome area there at low angles. Too complicated. We don't use that. Actually, for modeling light capture in strip canopies, we use what is hidden somewhere in this very brilliant thesis that I have difficulty to read beyond page 20. I don't know if you ever read it.
Never attempted.
Never attempted. Well, I at least tried. Written by Jan Goudriaan. He's long retired. He's still alive, walking around in Wageningen. He's extremely smart. He's a physicist. And he developed a light model. I'll just show you the equations. These are the equations for light interception in the strip crop, referring to this booklet, 1977. So 50 years old, still going strong. What do we need? The width, the height, and the path. I'll show you what it is. Light extinction coefficient and leaf area index. And if you know these 5 things for 2 crop species, we can calculate light interception for the whole canopy with this bunch of equations that you can easily put in Excel. So you don't have to understand that because actually incredibly hard to understand what's behind this. Jan didn't even try to explain it. It just says this is good. That is true. That's essentially what he has done. He has said, I tested it. It's good. You can use it. Okay. This is the path. It's the width. The width between the blocks of canopy. This is the width of the block of canopy. This is the height. And extinction coefficient is just which proportion of the light is captured per unit of leaf area index. I think you agree with that.
The K can be larger than 1.
Yeah.
It's not a fraction.
Ratio.
Yeah.
Okay, agree with you. And then, yeah, the model is very simple. The model says the change in biomass that we calculate is the incoming light times the proportion that's intercepted times the light use efficiency. In this strip intercrop system where we're thinking, okay, what happens if we make the strips wider? Are we going to lose our advantage or not? So we use this light interception model to do that. Now, border rows usually have different performance than inner rows. This is a row number. This is work by Gao Fang, and it shows the wheat grain yield per meter row. It's expressed per meter row length because different row positions have a different weight of grain per meter of the row length. The rows at the outer edge of the strip have much greater yield. And this is why, because the plants have many more tillers. But do these border rows also have increased resource use efficiency? Actually, we're not so sure. We had a PhD student working on that in the last couple of years. And there's some evidence that there is some slight difference, but really not too much. But the literature says you will have difficulty to see that, but here is approximately 20 papers, and this is just vote counting. Crop 1, crop 2, it's higher light use efficiency in border rows, no difference. Higher, higher, no difference. Higher, higher, no difference. 6 times, no difference. And 1 time, worse. And for crop 2, something similar. So Pepijn also did a small meta-analysis to see what is the response in border rows. And then he elaborated scenarios for the effect of strip widths on the performance of wheat maize relay strip intercropping, the system that Fang studied. And he used 4 scenarios, light use efficiency estimated with Chinese data, and assuming no border row effect, because we're not sure about this effect on the light use efficiency. Light use efficiency estimated with Chinese data, but assuming there's a border row effect, I'm not going to give you details. And then the same with estimates made in the Netherlands. And these are the results, and the results look complicated, but actually I only want you to look at the trend. The trend is down. Everywhere the trend is down. And what the trend is giving you, the figure is the land equivalent ratio and the wheat strip width. And the different lines are for different number of maize rows in the strip. The key outcome is that if you go to the strip width beyond 2 or 3 meters, you're going to lose much of your advantage. And yeah, that's all I want to say about it, because it's also uncertain, these results. And this I'm going to skip because it's too complicated to explain. So, key findings. Yield advantages declined rapidly with wider strips. Profitability will depend on the cost of narrow versus wide strip or strip cropping. Effects only based on competitive or complementary radiation capture. So we didn't pay any attention to water. I think that is a mistake if we go to places here on the sand near the Veluwe, where I think water is very important. And no intercropping effects of pests and diseases, but these effects exist. So I think we're underestimating the effectiveness of strip cropping. But this study confirms that, yeah, from land equivalent ratios that are high, 1.2 or 1.4 or 1.5, it will decrease if you go to wider strips. And farmers actually, they will tell you, yeah, 6 meters is okay for me, or 12 meters, or can I do 24? Well, this goes to 12 meters, so you're at the point where you've lost all advantage in terms of radiation capture, but maybe there's still something in disease control. Wrap up. Benefits of intercropping: it gives you better resource capture, more efficient use of land, almost as good as the most productive, most efficient sow crop. TOI is almost 1. So increases yield at the farm level, because that's what land equivalent ratio tells you, because you can get rid of low yielding crops by planting them in intercrops. But even if the yield at the crop level is not necessarily increased. For me, that is the paradox that needs explaining, but not everybody thinks that's the paradox. If you have good growing conditions, if you want to have yield advantages, you need to combine species with partially overlapping growing periods in relay intercrops. I think that by using intercropping with species complementarities, especially for legumes and nitrogen captured by biological fixation, you can reduce inputs. So it's a big perspective for intercropping. And it provides all kinds of other ecosystem services that I did not talk about. although we have information about it, and that includes disease and pest control and a soil formation organic matter. That has been demonstrated. We have lots of challenges. For me, this is really what I'm thinking about all the time. What intercropping system is good for each place? So think about the place, the production situation, and the type of farmer, full-time, part-time, small farm, large farm, market or non-market. Every farmer needs to tailor his species combination and his management to achieve what he's looking for. And he needs to look at genotype of one species, genotype of the other species, the environment he's in and its variability, and what he's going to do. Strip intercropping for now is constrained by lacking mechanization. And even if the mechanization is there, if it is using small equipment and you have to sit on it, you still will not be using your time efficiently. So I suppose we need robots, but this is very slowly developing. People say, oh, it's totally possible. And then 10 years later, it's still totally possible. That's my experience, because they told us 10 years ago it's totally possible. For full mixtures, I think a lot can be done, either using a mixed product as it is, for silage, or for bread making, or for food processing, or directly, or separated. And we need varieties, so that will come. Challenges for China, with decreasing rural populations and farm scale enlargement, the farmers' time to do intercropping will diminish. So mechanization is key, and Li Long will be talking about that. Smallholder farmers are very interested in intercropping, but farmers on larger farms are only interested if intercropping can be done quickly and efficiently. And there are key challenges in sowing, harvesting, processing, weeding. And for strip cropping, I think we're in the process of gathering data. So there are some very positive findings. Personally, I'm not yet convinced. I would like to see it repeated more. I mean, if you find a 20% yield increase in strip cropping, I don't believe it until I know a mechanism. And right now, there's no mechanism. So then I think, okay, you measure it, but could it be due to variability in your field, perhaps? Are you sure it's not? I don't know. I don't know. Talk to Dirk. Say, Wopke is skeptical. Thank you. It was a bit long, sorry.
Questions?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think in common use of intercropping, we use normal cultivars, what are developed